Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. Often we hear the term Judeo-Christian values, and the question often is asked, what is the Jewish roots in American history? Well, I am really honored to have a special guest with us today, Wilfred McClay. He is a professor of history at Hillsdale College, where he holds the Victor Davis Hanson Chair of the Classical History and Western Civilization. He's the author of several award-winning books, including The Masterless, Self and Society in Modern America, Land of Hope, and The Invitation to the Great American Story. And his latest book is entitled Jewish Roots of American Liberty. You can check that out. And of course, hillsdale.edu is the website, hillsdale.edu. Professor, good to see you. How are you, friend?
It's fine. It's very good to be with you.
Thank you. This is fascinating.
From the what I see, you have better weather there than we're having here in Michigan.
Well, we're enjoying a beautiful fall out here on the west, no question about it. Yeah. This is fabulous. What made you decide to take this on?
Well, it's a tangled thing because it started out with a different motive. My friend Stuart Halpern, with whom I co-edited the book, is a rabbi and a professor at Yeshiva University in New York. And what he was into, that's an Orthodox university, Orthodox Jewish university, the only one in the country. And he was concerned about the fact that so many Jewish day schools, there's quite an interesting movement in the Jewish world towards Jewish education in place of secular schools, but they tended to neglect American history as part of their curriculum, not seeing that. And this is actually true of many Christian schools, that they don't pay as much attention to American history. So, but this was specifically geared towards Jewish teachers in Jewish schools. So I was brought in to try to persuade them they did need to know about American history. That's very for them to understand the American tradition of religious liberty, how that has made America an especially important home for the Jewish people in their storm-tossed history. And so we did a couple of conferences at Yeshiva, and we realized that the story sort of went both ways, that Jews need to be more aware of America, but America needed to be more aware of the Jews, and that is of the Judaic roots of their own civilization, and how a recovery of the knowledge of those roots be very important to our national recovery that we believe and hope and pray is underway. So the meeting shifted in the middle of the thing, and it really was after we'd done these two conferences that we said, this could be a book. This could be a valuable book. So we set out, we solicited some other chapters and put the book together. And it's an assemblage of different elements. There are essays by me and Rabbi Halpern about different subjects and other scholars. There also are documents, presidential speeches and papers of a surprising range of people, Franklin Roosevelt to Calvin Coolidge, talking about the importance of the Jews in America. And we conclude with some up-to-date essays, which are, at least one of them does reflect a post-October 7th, 2023 world in which we find ourselves, in which suddenly anti-Semitism has not been it's been a problem for Jews, but it hasn't been a problem of our whole civilization the way it seems to be becoming. And this is certainly not just in the United States. It's even more pronounced in Europe and in much of the rest of the world. But so that's kind of how it happened. And it does seem, if I may put it this way, to have come at a providential moment, because there's a real need, I think, of Americans be appreciating our Jewish roots. So that's where we ended up.
This is fascinating because we often, obviously, hear the term Judeo-Christian, but it's never really defined. It's never really looked upon. And how would you define Judeo-Christian?
Well, that's an interesting question because I think for a long time it was simply a way of including Jews in what is fundamentally a Christian and primarily Protestant over the years consensus about ultimate values and so on, and the nature of God. Uh, I think what's happened in the last maybe 40 years or so, maybe more than that, but has been a gradual convergence of Jews and Christians. There's no budging. These are the people who are least likely to budge on the absolute essentials for Christians. The belief in the Trinity, belief in Jesus Christ's divine nature, and so on. And for Jews, the non-belief in those things. Excuse me, just a second here. But now I think we have so much more in common than we do faced with a militant secularism that takes a very different view of the human person, of the nature of the universe, the nature of God, that there is a God, and so on. So I think we've come together in a way that no one could have ever expected, and that's a big part of the genesis of the book. But and I could then rattle off some of those ways that our similarities are much more apparent than they seem to be. But one of the most important goes back to the fundamental assertion in our Declaration of Independence: all men are created equal. Well, it's very nice that Thomas Jefferson said that. Where did it come from? Where did this idea come from? And it came from the Bible. It came from Genesis. It came from the notion that we are made in the image of God, created by a being that is more powerful than nature, that superintends nature, that spoke the world, and that human beings are created in the image of that. Human life is sacred. Child sacrifice is abhorrent. That kings are answerable to an ultimate judge, and so on. All sorts of ways that the Jewish understanding, as we see it laid out in Genesis and in the first 5 books of Pentateuch, the Old Testament, in ways that Christianity rests upon foundationally.
So,
and when in the early days of this country, nobody needed to be told this. It was blazingly apparent, and we have a couple of great essays in the book by some of the best scholars on the subject, who just on subject after subject, founding father after founding father, they all pay testament to not just to the understanding of God, but the understanding of political society and of the character, sacred character of human life. So it's only been in recent years we've lost that sense of biblical rootedness. And I think we need it back.
Oh, no question. So let me ask you this: how has trying to figure out how to ask this question? How has Judaism and the Hebrew Bible maybe as an example, but how has all of this played a role in defining what we call freedom? And does that have something to do with the story of Exodus in the Bible? Is there a
parallel? It certainly does.
Okay, is there a parallel there?
It certainly does, and I don't know whether you have a copy of the book handy, but we have a rendering on the cover of the famous scene in the Exodus in which the Jews cross the Red Sea, waters part, and after they've crossed, Pharaoh and his army try to come behind in their swamp. So, and where did this picture come from? This is so interesting. I think your listeners may not know about it. It came from Benjamin Franklin. After the country was founded, of course, we had to have a seal of the United States to, affix to official documents, as every country does. So a committee was formed. Yes, we had committees even then. And on the committee was Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and others. And both Jefferson and Franklin wanted the seal to symbolize the Exodus. Franklin spelled it out in great detail that there would be this picture that corresponds to what's on the cover of the book, um, and a motto, and the motto was rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And so they saw, and Jefferson in particular wrote about this, that the Exodus was symbolic of the human race freeing itself from, the darkness of superstition and of the pre-moral state of society, and that out of which the human race had gradually been rising with the American Revolution had taken a giant step. Of course, Jefferson, for him, this is the Exodus kind of interpreted as coextensive with the Enlightenment. Not all of us would do, but still, he thought this spoke better about what America was about in a world historical, cosmic sense than any other image. So, and actually, Jefferson, we all know Jefferson was kind of unorthodox in his religious views, to put it mildly, but he did have religious views, and he did he adopted rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God as his own personal slogan, his motto that he used for his own personal seal. So that tells you a lot. He wanted to associate himself and his enlightened view with the story of the ancient Hebrews. It was the sort of original of freedom, that to be freed from slavery to other men and brought into the lordship of God. This was not an idea that was completely abhorrent to Jefferson, to put it mildly. He didn't like organized religion, and all of it. Exceptions, qualifications have to be made, but yeah, he saw Exodus, and he wasn't the first American. When the Puritans came over, the Pilgrims, the Puritans, were coming up on Thanksgiving. They saw their trek across the ocean as a redo. That's almost too strong a word, but not quite. A redo of the Israelites' liberation by the hand of God from the slavery of Egypt to the freedom of the promised land. And for them, America was a promised land. It was a place where they could build the pure church, the church that had been corrupted, first by Roman Catholicism and then by the Church of England failing to clean house. One last example, you could give many more. The Mormons are an example, by the way. They had the whole thing worked out as a kind of Exodus narrative. But African American slaves in the antebellum years, we all know the beauty of the spirituals that they sang. Often their texts had to do with the Exodus. "Go down, Moses. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go." There you, there you have it. It's a sort of, it's part of the Exodus narrative
Right. Right.
that African American slaves, who many of whom couldn't read, most of whom couldn't read, but they knew the stories,
Mm.
and they knew that God delivered His people in the narratives of the Old Testament, and that God would deliver them too, or so they hope.
All right. Let me take a quick break here. I want to come back. I have a lot of questions. Let me set our viewers and listeners. Professor Wilfred McClay with us, professor there at Hillsdale College, and you can go to hillsdale.edu. That is the website, and check out his latest book. I'm sure you can get it online. Jewish Roots of American Liberty. There's a picture of the cover of the book and the scene that he was talking about there. Check it out, Jewish Roots of American History. Boy, this needs to be taught. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. What an honor to have with us today Wilfred McClay. He's a professor of history there at Hillsdale College. He's the author of quite a few books. His latest one, I think you're going to want to get a copy of, is called Jewish Roots of American History. There's a picture of the cover of the book. You can probably go online and get that by Wilfred McClay. And then, of course, hillsdale.edu. Hillsdale.edu, and that is for Hillsdale College. Professor, I'm just curious, Puritans to the founders, was the Geneva Bible their Bible?
You know, I can't answer that. I mean, I think at a certain point, yes, but and they were Calvinists, so they worked out of the same ecclesiastical tradition that produces the Geneva Bible. And just as Lutherans use the German translation of the Bible by Luther, it's sort of representative of the move towards the vernacular that's part of the Reformation.
My other question is, how has this recent rise of anti-Semitism furthered the gap between the Americans and the Jewish history in America?
Well, yeah, it's that's hard to assess. I'm not even sure, that the anti-Semitism is not being stirred up by other actors, mischievous actors in other countries, either as the direction of other foreign governments, or this revelation recently of the fact that so many of these people on Twitter who are we're talking about being victimized in Gaza. It turns out they're living in Poland or Brazil or other places because their information was exposed by inadvertently by Elon Musk's company. But but look, I think it's real. I think the rise is real. I think there's a hostility to Israel, precisely because of Israel's success. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. It's economically a dynamo, and this is something that has produced enormous envy. In Europe, I think anti-Semitism has never died out. The Hitler may have died in his bunker, but anti-Semitism didn't die with him. And it's be against Israel. I'm sad to say, is for some people a veiled way of being against Jews. I do think that it is one can be philo-Semitic and nevertheless have great qualms about the Israeli government and particular actions of it. That's normal. You don't just agree with everything because you're co-religionist or something like that. But I think that the virulence of it is what gives the game away. Is Israel's war, current war, was fought in reaction to an incursion, a completely unprovoked incursion uh, of just a horrifically violent character, barbaric. So I don't want to get too far off the question, but I think that there is a wedge that's formed.
So let me ask you this. From your book, what is the biggest thing that we're missing with the Jewish roots in American history? What's the biggest part that we're not getting?
I think that there is in a way, it's captured by rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God, but it's there are certain truths that the Hebrew Bible establishes that are foundational to Christianity and to our way of life in America, in American democracy, and we are built around a monotheistic notion of the supreme being, although in Christians it's a Trinitarian, triune monotheism, but it's grounded in the covenant of Abraham in the Bible, the testimony of the Bible. Christianity comes out of Judaism. The world was created separately from a being separate from nature. The world doesn't just come about because of nature, the operations of nature. God is not the same as nature. God is distinct from nature and us. But we are created in His image. I think that's the answer to your question. That the notion that our human dignity, which of course all the sort of liberal, postmodern theorists say, well, yes, everybody's equal. What's the grounding of it? What is the grounding of that idea? Because clearly we're not equal in some of the obvious ways. I am not LeBron James's equal when it comes to basket. Let's stop there. I can barely hit a free throw, but we are equal in the eyes of God. The only way that really matters, ultimately, we're equal. Our achievements in this life are not what redeems us. Although we work hard at our vocations and they work to the glory of God, but it is this notion that we are made in the image of God, and that is what gives us our dignity. Not just the fact that we've done a lot of really cool things and we built bridges and atom bombs and God knows what else. Right. These are signs of power that we have used and often misused that are part of our God-given power, but that we are made in the image of human life is sacred. That is fundamental.
Do you see an awakening in the Jewish community as much as we need to see it in our own lives and thinking of the connection of Jewish roots in American history?
I do, and I don't think this is just wishful thinking on my part. I see a lot of younger Jews who want to align themselves with Orthodoxy, which is pretty, that's pretty demanding. A really from Orthodoxy, but they want to move in that direction, and they understand that there's a freedom in following the commandments of a God that you trust. That's freedom. That's not freedom to determine everything about your own life, from who you marry down to what sex you are. This is a freedom that's slavery, because it ultimately is not grounded in anything that endures, any connection to the transcended power that gave us life. They're yearning for that. Look, this is not true of everybody. I think you probably find in a lot of Jewish institutions an aversion to this sort of. Yeah. There's a suspicion of evangelicals, which is really not very smart, because to be pro-Israel, anti-evangelical, to be in complete contradiction. The world has no greater source of support for the people of Israel than the evangelicals in America, and the smart people there know it, and they know that this isn't just an alliance of convenience, that there's something that us together.
Right.
And it has to do with this sort of majesty, sovereignty of God, the respect.
Professor, you're fascinating. I really appreciate your passion. I want to get you back. Let me say to our viewers and listeners in the meantime, get a copy of this book. It's called Jewish Roots of American History. I think you'll find it to be a fascinating read, and you may want to share it with others. Also, the professor there, professor of history at Hillsdale College, you can go to hillsdale.edu, and a very respected institution, and I highly recommend it, hillsdale.edu. Professor, thank you for your time. Happy Thanksgiving, and let's reconnect.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate being with you.
Okay, God bless. Bye-bye.